Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are calling in from and zooming in from around the world. This is Doug Brunke. I'm at the Global Chamber headquarters in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we have a really distinguished, intelligent, worldly, and healthcare-related group today from all over the world. And I think you're really going to enjoy today's conversation. We're going to first go to, I believe, in Buenos Aires. Certainly, Ricardo Vanella is based in Buenos Aires. He's an international team member of Meditar, and he's going to be speaking this morning about the telemedicine implementation in Argentina that you're involved with. Ricardo, good morning.
Good morning, Doug. Good morning, everybody. I'm very honored to be here with you. And about the issue we are going to talk today, I could say that this is a real challenge, but a good one, a very good one. Telemedicine is, all tele activities are taking over all the rest in the world. You can see what happened with the banks is happening in any other sector and any other industry, because it's easier, it's faster, it's cheaper, and it is possible because of the new technologies. And talking about the technologies, which is a very key issue, a key success factor, we can say that thanks to Global Chamber, by the way, we got in touch with the biggest company dealing with technology for telemedicine, which is an American company from Arizona. They are providers, amongst others, they are providers of the White House, including the Air Force One, to the Department of Defense, to many oil companies in the world, to everyone that needs or has a special need to provide medicine at the distance. For example, in case of natural disasters and in case of just distance because of the topology of a country and the demography of a country. We have that technology. Thanks to the intervention of Global Chamber, I repeat, and Doug, personally, we made an agreement with Global Med, and from Meditar, we are providing telemedicine for Argentina first, that's our first step, and then to not only the neighbor countries, but all over Latin America, and the real plan, the last picture, is to provide telemedicine all over the world, including the US, of course. And for doing that, it's a very important strategic alliance we have done. We, as Meditar, we are a company, a very well-established company, provider of high complexity medical services. So we have been in the market for more than 28 years. Thus, we have a very big network of medical providers, the biggest in Argentina. We have around 700 institutions and professionals, medical providers. The best of the best. Secondly, we have a very sound knowledge on how to provide medical services. And a distance as well, because Argentina is pretty big as a country. We have in the north, I always, to describe this, the topography of our country, I describe it in this way. In the north, we have crocodiles and eagles, and in the south, we have penguins and whales. And this is the diversity we have here. So we provide medicine to those provinces far away from Buenos Aires. We call provinces what in the US is called states. We provide to those provinces medical services, and they are very, very far from the capital, the nation capital, which is Buenos Aires. So we made an alliance with a U.S. company thanks to Global Chamber, and we have the software and the hardware. The hardware is exactly the same that the best of the best in the world are using, and this is provided by the U.S. company again. What is the key success factor in this business? Well, of course, technology is a key success factor. When I say technology, I mean both hardware and software. The software, by the way, you can access through an app, through your smartphone, from anywhere in the world. And a second key success factor we have from Argentina is the high quality of medical service we are able to provide. I would like to mention, by the way, that we have some Nobel Prize both in medicine, in chemistry, etc. And we have some Argentine creators of the bypass, for example, and other technologies used in medicine. And within our network from Meditar, we have the best doctors and the best institutions from Argentina. But it's not enough. We have prices. Because, my friends, when you are dealing with health, and you know that very well in the U.S., you have to make your calculation. You have to make your thoughts about, you have to calculate your expenses. And you have at the same quality of doctors, and they perhaps are even they have a master, they have studied in the U.S. even, and they speak English if you want. We have those doctors, we have the same elements. When I say elements, I mean the materials you use. For example, for open heart surgery, you can pay around $120,000 in the U.S., in Miami, for example. In Argentina, for exactly the same thing, you pay $30,000 US dollars. And why that big difference? Well, I can tell you that I learned this many years ago, some time ago, from a personal case, from the girlfriend of my elder son. She used to play soccer in Chicago, and she had some problems. She had to be under surgery for the ligaments in the knee, and such an operation was $78,000 US dollars in Chicago, while in Buenos Aires was $4,000.
And so I think what you're saying is that telemedicine opens up the opportunity for people around the world to access not only capabilities, but also maybe lower cost healthcare that they may not, in fact, would not have access to today.
Positive, Doug, is correct. That's the idea. I mean, you can access to the same quality you have, or even better, when you are not in the U.S. I mean, for example, our neighbors in Paraguay, Uruguay, Chile, even in Latin America or African countries, or even in Europe. For example, in Europe, you have to wait a lot for a hip replacement. You can wait 2 or 3 years. But if you are 80 years old, you can die after 3 years or 4 years. Perhaps you lack of time to wait. Well, we can treat you with telemedicine until the time to get under surgery, and you can come here for surgery. So telemedicine, it's a solution for everything, but not surgery.
Yeah, that's hard to do by telephone. So the $90,000.
Doug, for the time being, because we have already in the world the technology to operate at distance, but we are not practicing yet.
Okay.
That,
well, we're gonna.
That apparel is called Da Vinci technology, the Da Vinci apparel.
Okay. We're going to have to move on, but remember that there's a Q&A section after this. We're started at the top of the hour. We're going to finish at the top of the hour. So before then, we will have Q&A. So if you have questions, you're watching, and you have questions for Ricardo, please bring them in. And Ricardo, if there's some other things that you want to say, then make sure during the Q&A you introduce those ideas. In the meantime, we're going to come back here into the U.S. Although Tatyana Kanzaveli is herself a very international person. Today she is in the Bay Area. She's the founder and CEO of Open Health Network. She's going to be talking about technology in healthcare. In particular, she'll be talking about AI, blockchain, and big data and some of the happenings there. That's a lot to cover in 6 minutes. So obviously, Tatyana, you're not going to be able to cover everything, but definitely for those watching, ask your questions, and we'll either follow up in this hour or in the next several days. Tatyana, thank you for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here. Can you hear me well?
Very good. Perfectly.
Okay, excellent. Happy to be here. Now, do I have control of the slides? Or I need to tell you when to move from one to another one. Okay. So as Doug mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of Open Health Network, and we're all about integrated way of serving patients. And to set up a stage on the technology, I just want to share with you with my view on what patient-centered care is and why most of the digital offerings in healthcare have failed. In my view, it was like a Wild West in digital health for a while. So if you look at patient-centered care, first of all, when you talk about patients, you're actually talking about the whole team, care team, if you will. And if you're not thinking that way, and if you're just building something that only patients can use, most likely a solution will not be usable, because there are family members, caregivers, nurses, and they all need to be able to access the same information from different angles. Next slide. I also strongly believe that patients have a right to access any digital content from any channel of their choice, whether it's a chatbot, app, phone call visit, and the last thing you want them to do is to re-enter or reinstate information that they already provided via different channel. So it's important, whatever you design in healthcare, to make sure that patients, A, can access from any communication channel, B, they can switch from one channel to another one, C, they don't have to re-enter data. Next slide, please. And the last point that's critical for adoption of any digital health offering is to understand that there is no such a thing as a generic patient. So there is no one-size-fits-all solution in healthcare. So anything that's been built or will be built has to be able to adapt. So talking about, big data and AI, you need to be able to integrate adaptive solutions. So anything that people see, and those people who have health issues, so they want to see relevant information, relevant to them specifically, and that can come from them having more than one health issue, the gender, age, location, and other things. This is just an example. Next slide, please. So the point is that niche, these integrated, not personalized solutions, they just don't work. Next slide, please. So my goal was to build a comprehensive system that enables to address all the points that I've mentioned before. So everything is adaptive, personalized for each patient, accessible via any integration channel, can get 100% health, 360 degrees of health data from EMR, from wearable devices, from everywhere else, and use that for AI and personalization, and can be used by extended healthcare team. Next slide, please. So this is an example of solutions that have been developed on our platform. And in this specific case, just I want to show you chatbots. They are adaptive. They are using very comprehensive AI, machine learning, neural networks, and everything else to make sure that information is personalized and also relevant. The next slide, please. At any point of time, people can switch to app in this example and again continue their conversation. We have the same integrated database, so they don't have to re-enter anything. Those are examples of apps that have been deployed. Some, in many cases, it's app and chatbot and voicemail, all developed, deployed, maintained on our platform. Next slide, please. They all, as you can see, white labeled and specific for customer needs. So talking about the blockchain, there are many different uses of the blockchain in healthcare. In our case, we strongly believe that patients should have full control on who does what with their health data. So we build a very comprehensive architecture that's integrated with everything else that I've just talked about, that enables patients to define the rules, who, when, and how can do what with their health data. They can see, it's a revocable consent. They also have a capability to share their metadata to anyone within the healthcare ecosystem. So, for example, pharma companies can find, using metadata layer, specific group of patients who can be eligible to participate, let's say, in clinical trials. Pharma companies using our infrastructure can develop smart contract and even compensate people who accepted their terms to participate in clinical trials. So the architecture is very flexible, adaptable, and uses multiple technologies, including AI and blockchain. Next slide, please. The key in anything in digital health is integration of AI algorithms into chatbots, voice, mobile apps, and everything else. It's an integrated part of what you do in healthcare. So an example of AI algorithms that we have developed and deployed, they vary from health insurance fraud. For example, algorithms that we developed enable like 90% plus accuracy on detection of potential fraudulent transaction of, let's say, opioid prescriptions. We modeled patient pathway. For example, we can accurately predict upcoming heart attack, if you will. We've done pharmacovigilance analytics on Twitter and so on. And the key is that all those algorithms can be integrated within the infrastructure and stack of technologies that seamlessly adapted to the needs of the specific use cases. Next slide, please. So here's, and again, those are very complex graphs, but just to give you a feel on the capabilities within our team to create algorithms that can be used for a variety of different cases. And in our case, we've been fortunate enough to work with amazing large healthcare providers, payers, and pharma, and create solutions that go from heart disease to addictions to autism, cancer, and more. So we have a lot of know-how and use cases and experiences to advise what works, what doesn't work. And again, it's a cross integration of AI, blockchain, voice, chatbot apps integrated with EMRs, wearables, Apple Health, Google Health, and so on. Next slide, please. So I hope you guys will have more detailed questions. I tried to cover very comprehensive technology stack of that is available today and successfully deployed in the marketplace. Thank you.
Tatyana, thank you very much. You're right, lots and lots of information. I had to look up the word pharmacovigilance because that was a new one.
Yes, it's very interesting because can you imagine the power of AI where you can look at Twitter data and find potential drug interaction, just looking at Twitter data. So you can say, yeah, so people who, and we were able to create that algorithm and warn pharma company before they knew that there is a drug interaction. So they had to reformulate certain things to make sure people don't have side effects from the drug they've developed. And this all has been done looking at Twitter data.
Wow. Fantastic.
Imagine, yes.
Awesome. So we do have some questions. We're going to save those till the end. Our next speaker, speaking of airports, Krishna is also at an airport in India. He's the international consultant or an international consultant at HIH. Krishna, you're going to be talking about AI in the Indian healthcare market. Thank you for sharing today.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm still waiting for Caesar to upload my slides. Yes, next slide, please. Today I will be talking about the Indian healthcare market and the specific context of artificial intelligence and what is happening currently at the healthcare market. I will show you a brief snapshot of how the healthcare market currently is. I will talk about the pro and contra arguments, and I will give you my take on and some closing statements. Next slide, please. So just briefly, the Indian healthcare market has a huge potential because of the numbers of the population we have. We have about over than 1.3 billion people, but still most of them living in the rural areas don't have proper access to healthcare, and the doctor-to-patient ratio is lesser than what the WHO recommends. However, you can see an increasing role of government in reaching out to people and providing healthcare services, and there was an uptick of about 370% in healthcare expenditure between the last, between 4 years from 2000 to 2014. Next slide, please. So the Indian healthcare market apparently is getting a huge data tsunami, which is in flooding of a lot of healthcare data. As you can see, the numbers are pretty staggering. They have increased from 153 to about 2,300 exabytes in a very short time frame. But however, AI can solve this problem by analyzing data in huge numbers and identifying patients that are at risk. It is also projected that AI can add about $957 billion to the healthcare market, already existing healthcare market, by 2035. Two recent partnerships are by IBM and Microsoft with a couple of hospitals in India, well-known hospitals in India. They are analyzing data to provide screening for cancer and cardiovascular non-communicable diseases. Next slide, please. So some of the examples are, as you can see on the slide, there are a couple of startups called Address Health, Live Health, Niramai, which use machine learning and artificial intelligence to streamline information, healthcare data, and to provide services like pediatric screening for students who go to school-going students, and breast cancer screening, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So again, just to reiterate, the Indian government is very bullish on the whole artificial intelligence and machine learning. So they're employing a lot of organizations to clear the law and to be able to create a social impact. Next slide, please. So the pro argument would be it obviously increases outreach for the rural areas. It can process healthcare data really quick, much quicker than mechanical work, and it can increase accuracy and reliability while lowering the cost of care. Next slide, please. But obviously there are also some valid challenges, like how it would be accepted culturally, and the algorithms used to develop develop and process this healthcare data are company specific, and they're not very standardized, and the physician does not have much control over these algorithms. And naturally, with all big data, there are concerns with data privacy and how clear the governmental policy is, on which the Indian government is now clearly working. Next slide, please. So just some closing statements. India can be a very potentially huge market to introduce new technologies, AI, machine learning in healthcare, big data. But however, there are some challenges that exist between the public and the private stakeholders. And like Mr. Alejandro mentioned, if you are able to navigate these challenges and understand the culture-specific context of how they might work, it can be really great. And the government recognizes AI as the way to go forward, and it is working on a lot of financing and funding solutions for different projects. Next slide, please. I want to leave you with a quote by Stephen Hawking, that we have to align. Computers will overtake humans at some point in the next years, but we need to make sure that we align our goals with them. Yes, so I'd be happy to answer any further questions.
Thank you very much, Krishna. There are some questions, and so we'll get to those in a minute. Hold that thought, everybody. What we're going to do is we're going to switch now to Alejandro. So Alejandro, if you could join us now, and you are the founder of Procursum. You probably better need to pronounce that, Procursum. Maybe that's a better pronunciation, medical. And you're going to be talking about medical technology in emerging markets. So kind of building off of what we've already heard. Thank you, Alejandro. I see that you're muted, but if you would start now, that would be awesome.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay, all right.
And you're calling from Miami today, I believe.
Yes, yeah, that's where I am today. So thank you for the opportunity. What I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about, the adoption and penetration of medical technologies in emerging markets, and I'll cover briefly what the opportunities are, as well as what the challenges are for the adoption of these technologies, and what multinational companies from developed markets may want to do to enter the emerging markets. These markets, the emerging markets, will be the growth drivers for medical technology and services because first, developed markets like the US, the European Union, Japan, they're only expected to grow long-term at low single digits. Think about 3% annual growth. while emerging markets have a long-term growth projection close to 10% annual growth. So there is a significant opportunity to continue to grow in the emerging markets. And some of the macro trends are very positive. And I'll actually touch on some of the points that Krishna was mentioning. One of them is, in some of these countries there are large populations, but they're not only large, but the population in these countries, in a lot of these countries, is starting to age. A similar process to what we've seen in the US or Europe. And this aging is bringing a different set of morbidities, more chronic diseases, cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes. There is actually an epidemic of obesity in some countries, which is changing the healthcare needs in these countries, along with an increased urbanization. So, it's bringing some opportunities as well as some challenges. Over the past few years, the middle classes have been growing in emerging markets. And as the middle class is growing, they're demanding better healthcare. And at the same time, governments in emerging markets are, stepping up the efforts to increase access to healthcare for the whole population. So with all of these positive trends, you would expect that, medtech industry would actually have a strong presence in these markets. However, for the medtech industry, emerging markets represent 9 to 10% of global sales, where for the pharmaceutical industry, it's almost a third, 30 to 35%. So why is this? This is, emerging markets are underrepresented when it comes to medical technology. And there are some structural constraints that may limit the access to medical technology. One of them is the low level of hospital beds, which is at the same time a hurdle as well as an opportunity, because the hospital infrastructure needs to increase in emerging markets, where normally a lot of countries struggle to be at the 1 bed per 1,000 population that is recommended by the World Health Organization, where in the developed markets, US, Europe, we're way above 3 beds per 1,000 population. There's a scarcity of human capital, just touching on something that Krishna mentioned as well for India. And the very diverse healthcare systems are all financially stressed. Governments are trying to give access to more people with limited resources. And this not only stresses the system, but also new technology may be actually priced out of the market. Yeah. So this may lead to opportunities for an expanding private sector, as well as opportunities to develop cost-effective technology that actually reduces complications and hospitalization or treatment cost. And this is where either telemedicine, AI may also come to help, in the development of these tools to have more cost-effective technologies in these markets. Other challenges include the perennial financial and political volatility, the very diverse regulatory requirements and standards, and in many cases non-transparent procurement practices. So again, there are opportunities and there are hurdles. So then how does the market supply? How does this need supply into the market for medical technology? We see that many multinationals, particularly the mid-sized to smaller ones, have a limited presence in these markets because they lack the understanding of them, because they are fragmented and lack critical mass, and because they oftentimes rely on local distributors, that may lead to several risks, limited visibility to the market needs or customer relationships, and of course, lost business opportunities. But at the same time, there are local companies, what I call the mid-tier companies, that have successfully developed over time. And these companies are fast learners. they started to thrive after the multinationals entered these markets, and they learned from the multinationals. And now they are developing mid-tier products that are affordable, that are clinically acceptable, and oftentimes they're highly tailored to meet the local needs. Think about, size, access to utilities, access to technicians. So all of these are hurdles that need to be overcome in this market. These mid-tier companies over time become regional or global companies, and then they compete with the developed markets multinationals. So then what can be done to capture the opportunities in these emerging markets? Well, I think companies that want to capture those opportunities need to do one of or all of the following: adopt best practices when it comes to developing a local distribution channel, evolve or create the right local organizations. But this requires to have an emerging markets mindset, when it comes to your portfolio, attracting talent, accessing the market, having a culture of swift decision-making, customer-centered culture. And, all of these is oftentimes conflicting with what I call the big corporate culture. And at the same time, it may be extremely time and resource consuming, but it's certainly a path. All of them, developing your local channel, establishing your local operation over time, or, companies may consider to do, acquisitions or enter into joint ventures with the local mid-tier companies.
That makes sense.
And these are, these are transformational transactions, but they are challenging. So it's, it's worth to say that they need to identify the risk, need to be able to navigate the local culture and practices, but when successful, it is really transformational when it comes to entering these markets in the right way and actually capitalizing on the opportunities.
Thank you, Alejandro. Let's hold that thought, and we'll come back to that. There's a couple questions about the emerging markets that you talked about. I'm going to slip over to the center part of Poland. Miroslaw Manicki is a health financial consultant, and he is going to be talking about public-private partnerships in healthcare for single payer systems, which really I think we're talking about reducing cost, right, and how to practically do that. Welcome, Miroslaw.
Hello again. Thank you for having me. Yes, I would like to convince you that the model I'm going to present can really substantially help to solve the problems presented by you. I'd like to talk about knowledge-based government business partnership in health sector to make the country ready for a single-payer health care system, and I will try to let you know why the single payer is, let's say, can help in this. The method of paying for medical services is a basic mechanism in managing healthcare. The organizational model for the, let's start with the first, yes. The organizational model for the institution responsible for paying for services has a large impact on the quality and efficiency of the services provided. For many years, there have been a visible tendency in many countries to limit the number of payers up to the creation of single payer institution. Mostly it has to this kind of actions was based on giving a chance to standardize and uniformize the processes of purchasing services and striving for paying for quality. The next slide, please. In this presentation, I would like to focus on the government business partnership. which is one of the most important factors leading to success in creating a single-payer organization and developing the related policies and technical process to achieve success. I mean, achieve success, it means to open the doors for new technology, for which is so very often, to make the payment model a big enabler to opening the door for new technology of any kind. I have the opportunity to lead the process of building single-payer model in Poland, and also I had the opportunity to assist as a chief of the party to assist Indonesian government to build their giant single-payer model covering 240 million of people. And we managed to do it several times because of introducing the specific model of policy and technical development processes. I divided it into two stages. The stage one is planning cascade, contracting and monitoring. The next slide. Looking at all this our interventions in the past, the problem is the same. In fact, regardless the geographical and cultural, let's say, the places. Many projects in healthcare get bogged down because of lack of the carefully country-tailored government business partnership, worsened by using of inflexible, expensive information technologies, many of which can be very damaging and expensive. Introduction of a new autonomous insurance institution operating on the basis of unified standard is a difficult task. If implemented correctly, a centralized payment structure can create a healthcare system that is genuinely organized around the health. You know, very often when we start to talk about single payer, people think about centralization, which seems to be very negative. It was in the past. Now there are open doors for single payer, even including the United States. I mean, California. The next slide, please. So the basic principles is to ensure the patient receive healthcare and social services in accordance with agreed standard and protocols. It means to pay for quality, to pay the price which is logical, which affordable for the payer, accepted by providers, and enjoyed by the people in case the co-payment is relatively small. The next slide, please. Planning, cascade, contracting, and monitoring. This is the core. Please, the next slide, please. Let me start from, in this planning, our planning model, let me start from the very top. It means the government. This is obvious that if you want to do something, set up new model, payment model, prices, or other elements, it must be the part of the national policy. And based on my personal experiences, participation of relevant stakeholder, it is the key element. This is the must. And when you look at this slide, we can see that the involvement of stakeholders in this process is growing. And finally, when we come to the very operational level, strategic health and society service purchasing model, it must be, as I put here, interactive stakeholders-driven process. It means it cannot be authoritarian decision setting up prices or let's say creating the list of services, but it must be permanently, day by day, interactively discussed and accepted by the stakeholders. And stakeholders, who are these stakeholders? I'd like again to mention the private sector providers of any kind, who must take part in this process. The next slide, please. Many years ago, when our discussion on this diagram started many years ago, when I was pushed to uniform the model. It means uniform the payment models for 17 independent health insurance organizations in Poland, which was almost impossible, and we had only 7 months to do it. And we managed, and this is why we managed, because we prepared ourselves with the very simple health needs assessments, followed by clear assessment of how many services in different categories are needed. This is a very nice, let's say, example for introducing new technologies which are expensive and it must be carefully planned. Services with the very often new technology, this is 90% of the price of the services. That's why if it is assessed, planned, and when the agreement is reached among the politicians on different levels, central, local, and finally private sector, private providers, public providers, and finally not forgetting about patients, it works. Finally, the most important from the perspective of this presentation, the most important element is infrastructure need assessment. Having this plan, you go to the private sector with the clear message regarding investments in health. Because we usually talk about 4 or 5 years plan. I left Poland after introducing me. I spent many years in Germany and then in Indonesia. And you know, the model was not forgotten, but somehow sidelined. And 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to represent the European Commission to deal with Poland regarding the budget for health. And I propose revitalize the model and upgrade this existing model. To my surprise, especially local governments were very enthusiastic. They were so happy to, let's say, to have the opportunity to again to start to talk about it. Next plan, please.
We're going to have to cut it right there, Miroslaw. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Could you take just 30 seconds to wrap up?
Yes. Okay. So the next slide, please. In this configuration, talking about stakeholders, public and private sector, as I said, this is the most important. And the next, please. Now we work on the stage number 2. Fluidity finance, from our perspective, is the solution. The tacit, explicit, expressive knowledge model is the missing link between people and technology. If you have time, please take a look at our websites, and if you have some money, maybe please invest in one of our books. So I think this is the future. This is the future of the solution, and as I said, the big enabler to open the avenue for new technology, for to enter the health market. Thank you.
Thank you, Miroslaw. We have about 8 or 9 minutes for questions, and so we're not going to be able to answer everything, obviously, today. So I just ask that everybody who answers just keep it as brief as you can. And remember, we do typically post these afterwards with additional information as well. So all the speakers, you'll have an opportunity to provide additional information and share that. And then if anybody has interest in connecting with any particular speaker, let us know, and we'll be able to do that for our members, absolutely. One of the questions is regarding HIPAA and privacy. This goes back to really Tatyana, and actually all of you were touching in this area, but Tatyana, you talked about this integrated solution, and so questions around security and how that is done in the model you talked about, and then also what does the timeline look like for an integration, an implementation of a system like what you described?
Real good questions, and everything that we do, of course, HIPAA compliant, and with the architecture that we've developed, it provides more privacy and security that currently exist. If you look at the data breaches at major healthcare organizations, they're pretty high. So we've developed highly secure, HIPAA compliant, distributed database outside of the blockchain that has a highly secure way of storing some healthcare data. Number one, it's very important, very good question. Happy to address in more details offline. The timeline to develop, because we created configurable, customizable platform. The timeline can be, you'll be surprised, it could be as fast as, a day or weeks versus months or years that, you do normally. And it can be deployed on any device and in any language. And I'm happy to actually show how, so it's not just words, this is a real infrastructure that we've developed and that has been used by American Heart Association, UCSF, Cornell, and many other organizations.
Okay, no, that sounds good. And you probably know this as well as maybe Krishna, and maybe all of you are more familiar with this. Alejandro, you touched on emerging markets as well. How are HIPAA and compliance issues, maybe it's not HIPAA in the emerging markets or in India, but there's certainly security issues that need to be used in Indonesia. Miroslav, you talked about that. How do what those of us know as HIPAA and the privacy requirements in the US translate into Europe, into Africa, into Asia, and to other countries? Is it happening there as well? As this universal?
Yes, this is the burning question now, especially between the United States and Europe. They are actually, let's say, in a very hectic discussions. Of course, these problems must be overcome. This is the question of the, first of all, the ownership of data. And, but if it is finally, let's say, set up, and if finally maybe with our assistance, if somebody can, let's say, consider our point of view, it will open the huge opportunities for tripling, quadrupling the market in healthcare and related issues.
Okay.
Social.
Krishna and Alejandro, the markets that you're primarily dealing with, I presume these are issues as well. So are the solutions that are coming in to, say, India, are these HIPAA compliant? Are these using a lot of the same technologies that Europe and the US are using?
Well, in my research, I found that the law is not very solidly established regarding data privacy, especially in India. So it doesn't necessarily translate as much as concerning in Europe or in the States. But eventually the board that is established, Indian government that established in 2015, is trying to formulate law around privacy and cybersecurity for healthcare data. They're working on it.
Okay. Sounds good. So just in the last couple minutes then, in terms of opportunities for our members, you guys talked about a lot of data issues. You've talked about, and Ricardo had to take a plane, so he was the one that talked about telemedicine, so he's not available right now. But so video and data management and big data, sensor technology, the slides you showed, Tatyana, where today there's periodic information going back and forth to the system and to the patient, and what you described or shared was almost a real-time monitoring and treatment of what's going on there. So considering that, where are some of the key opportunities for our members to consider jumping in? Where are the jumping in points for companies at this point over the next 5 years? And Tatyana, do you want to start?
So I think there are a lot of good points mentioned by all the participants, and my take is that anything that you do has to be integrated, personalized, and adaptive. Like Doug, you just mentioned, when we're looking at the patient, we can't just look at the point of treatment time. It's continuous care. We see more and more real good initiatives on preventive care that goes back to what Professor mentioned from Poland, that whether it's a single payer or not, if we're looking at outcomes, then we need to switch on preventive care. Now, how that can be done by having adaptive care plans that take real-time data and adapt your recommendation that include 360 degrees of your life, right? It's diet, it's exercise, it's everything else that's related to causation, treatment, potential outcomes of any diseases. So I see that whatever countries are looking at have to take into consideration all those aspects of integrated care.
Okay. And yet at the same time, and we're going to have to actually end it here, at the same time, there are solutions. Yesterday I was with a company from Taiwan and the U.S. that's working on Alzheimer's. There's a company right next to Global Chamber here in Scottsdale that's working on epilepsy. And so they have particular solutions around a certain, disease or problem. But at the end of the day, you're not saying don't do that. You're saying at some point some of this kind of becomes all integrated into the system, so that
right.
So whether it's epilepsy, whether it's Alzheimer's, whatever it is from a patient perspective monitored by the system in a secure way that's almost real time.
Right, Ian. I mean, I agree that right now we're at initial stages of everything. So we look at the patient as basically the patient has this condition or disease. In real life, we go through many different conditions, and many people have more than one, right? So, and in real life, if you're an ill person who has more than one condition, you will not use 10,000 apps and chatbots, right? And there is a correlation between certain treatments and so on the big data and analytics point of view. So everything tells you that you have to step back and look at what the real life will look like and what people actually will use. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what I would ask all of the speakers, and I'll follow up with Ricardo as well, is if you could identify some key areas that you believe our members should be thinking about from an opportunity perspective, let us know those and we'll include that in the wrap up. And then if there's something that you feel needs to come out, send us an email or connect up with us and the team, and we'll make sure that gets included in the wrap up, because it's top of the hour right now exactly, and so we're going to have to end it. Our conversation today, really an amazing topic, way too much information to cover in an hour, but all of you did a really great job in terms of bringing things to the table, some great starting points and some great information. So thank you very much, all of you. In terms of our next steps, the reason why we do things like this is to identify opportunities, trends for our members to jump in. And so some of the things that we have coming up in the next several weeks. We have one on fraud and what's happening of how to manage that around the world. We have a conversation about the country of Georgia and the opportunities there. We have a conversation about how to manage your prospects and members in a better way. So we have an education around that. And then we have a conversation about the changing workforce in Asia. So all of these are intended to give our members more information to help them understand where the jump-in points are for their own business. Thank you all speakers. Thank you all for attending, and have a great rest of your week. Contact us at info@globalchamber.org with any information, and we look forward to speaking with you again. Thank you, everybody.